Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair. Many congratulations to Karima Koertit and Peter Nijkamp for their new initiative, the Microcosmic Intelligent City Center. So I think it's a great new initiative that brings together many different people. And already many different people are here together from all kinds of countries. What I would like to do is present a perspective that's probably a little bit different from the economist perspectives, economic perspectives that are presented here, because I'm a public management scholar, so my field is public management, public administration, and I would like to present a perspective that I call the Datapolis. And I use this perspective, this name Datapolis, because I think we're talking too much about cities as technologies, buildings, infrastructures, whereas at heart it's about the people. And I'm not going to do some kind of melodramatic appeal. No, what I want to emphasize is that we as scholars of political communities, groups of citizens living together, want to study these cities as groups of citizens, communities of citizens in an information age. And at the heart, that is what it's about when we talk about smart cities. We're talking about communities of citizens in an information age. And I want to explore with you what it means if you think about smart cities like that, if you think about smart cities as communities of citizens in an information age. And to do this, I first need the technology to work. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, if you want to understand the governance perspective, and I'm going to bring it quite simple because it's still quite early in the morning. At its heart, you could say there's different perspectives on how to solve problems in the city. So there's all kinds of problems related to sustainability, inclusiveness, security, etc. All the kinds of problems that we are interested in, that we talk about when we look at cities. And if you look at how cities can solve these problems, on the one hand, there's what you could call the engineer perspective. And the engineer would say, if we want to solve problems, if we want to have sustainable cities, if we want to have secure cities, we should make a good analysis of the problems, we should look at the available solutions, and we should choose the solution that works best in that specific context. So that's an engineer's analysis based on a rational analysis of problems and available solutions to come to more livable, prosperous cities. But that's not the only way of looking at problem solving in urban environments. Political scientists will look at it quite differently. They will say a city is always a combination of people with different values, different interests, different positions, different perspectives on the city. So if we want to understand how a city is trying to solve its problems, we should look at politics. And we should look at, for example, different perspectives on sustainability. Some people say we should bring more sustainability by having more solar energy, more windmills, etc. Other people are saying that we should find different kinds of solutions. Other people are saying sustainability is not a big problem at all, it's a hoax. So there's all these different perspectives. And we look at politics, you see there's elections, there's preferences of citizens, there's political strategies. At the moment in the Netherlands, we just had our local elections. So now the local programs for the next 4 years are being formulated. But this is not a rational, technical exercise. This is a political exercise where we have different interests, different people trying to influence the direction of the city. So that's quite a different perspective. And if you want to understand what we do as governance scholars, you should really understand that as a combination of these two. We are really interested in collaboration in terms of in a situation of value pluralism. So it's not collaboration between citizens, between actors that all have the same position. It's collaboration between governments, between companies, between citizens, between civil society organizations, between research institutes. And they all have different perspectives, they have different values, they have different interests, but at the same time they still want to collaborate. And that's what we call puzzling empowering. It's both about trying to influence the outcome in a certain direction, but it's also about collaborating towards a situation that's better for all. So it's in this situation where it's both about competing and collaborating, it's about sometimes fighting each other, sometimes collaborating, that we try to understand how new forms of governance emerge. And from this perspective, from a governance perspective, it is important to look at the smart city as what I would call a datapolis. I use the term datapolis for several reasons. First reason is smart city is very much a normative concept. There's very few cities that like to call themselves a stupid city or a dumb city. So everybody wants to be a smart city. And let there be no unclarity about this. Smart city at its heart is a marketing concept. It's not a concept that we as academics invented to understand new developments in cities. It was a concept developed by high-tech companies such as Siemens, Cisco, IBM to sell their technology to local governments. So it is at its very heart, it's a marketing concept. That does not mean that this marketing concept cannot be useful for understanding developments in modern cities, but it does mean that we have to give a new meaning to it, that we have to give a meaning to it that appreciates the variety in values, the variety in interest, the democratic interactions, etc. So we need to take this concept, and that's why I see the smart city as a datapolis. A second reason for doing that is because I think we should go back to the very roots of what a city is. In a Greek sense, it was a community of citizens working together to protect their individual and collective interests. So at the heart, that's what it was about. And in Athens, it was the citizens meeting at the square to discuss these issues. Well, we can no longer do it this way, but we have all kinds of digital agora that we can use to discuss these issues. And we have our elections, and we have participation, etc. So in the same way as or in a much larger way than the Greeks used to do that, we still have these communities of citizens that are thinking about how to give meaning, how to work together, how to create cities that are beneficial to our private and collective interests. So the polis is a very, very, very important concept that helps us to refocus smart cities on what it is. It's the collective interest of citizens. It's also important, there's a lot of discussion about user-centered design, bringing the user back in, more attention for the user. I would be careful with using that type of terminology because the user, in its end, is again a commercial concept, which is about a user of a certain technology. So there's a producer-user relation. Whereas I would think at the heart, that's not what cities are about. Cities are communities of citizens living together and protecting their individual and collective interests. So it's not users, it's citizens that have to form their collective interests. So it's not about the individual users that express their preferences. It's about having debate. It's about collective preference aggregation. The idea of the polis, which of course is a very old idea in political science, is changing in this information age. And I would argue it's changing in two directions. On the one hand, all the interactions in cities, in the polis, are increasingly influenced by the availability of data. And I wouldn't, at this moment, not go so far to say that what's not in the data does not exist, but it seems that we're really heading that way. So if we look at crime rates, the crime rates that are registered, that are present in data, that can be presented in crime maps, are the forms of crime that exist and that need to be tackled. The crime rates that are not available in the data do not exist. So the data increasingly determine what is real in the city, what exists. The data also have a huge influence on what we can regulate. We can regulate the things that we have data about. If we don't have data about certain types of behavior, we cannot regulate it. So all these key functions in these communities, in what I would call the datapolis, are influenced by these data structures. The data structures influence how we interact and what governments can do. At the same time, these data structures are being influenced by dominant relations in smart cities, in the datapolis. So if there's a a conservative local government with a high focus on reducing crime, then there will be a strong focus on using monitors to monitor crime rates in different areas and use these crime data to fight crime. Whereas environmentalist government would more focus on data on air quality or other kinds of issues. So the data structures that we create also result from these relations of power. And I think that's very, very important that we realize that these data systems are not neutral. The data systems are the result of political constellations, and they influence political constellations. So in that sense, the Datapolis is another type of polis than the traditional Greek polis, because it's so much interconnected with these data structures. If we look at the Datapolis or the smart city this way, how can we study that? And well, we have a whole field of study, public administration, but I would like to single out one approach, and that's presented by Fritz Sharp in his book on games real actors play. And Fritz Sharp, the German sociologist, makes the point that if we want to understand social interactions, we can understand these social interactions as a series of games that real actors play. So you could say this is a game that we're playing. The game is that I'm the presenter and you are the audience. We all know the rules. You are quiet. I'm talking. I have a certain amount of time, which I will try to stick to. But this is the game that we are playing here in this situation. And the point that Fritz Sharp makes is that if you look at governance in cities, you can also see that as a series of games. And if you want to look at it that way, you have to understand who the actors are. Who are the actors that are playing? Here there's me as the presenter, there's several academics from different countries. So we are playing this, there's the people for technology that make this work. So there's several actors playing this. But if we look at the smart city, we have to look at the citizens, we have to look at the tech company, we have to look at the research organizations, we have to look at civil society organizations, we have to look at political groups. So there's all kinds of actors that are involved in the smart city game, you could say. And secondly, there's a set of rules that they play by, and sometimes these are formal rules. The new GDPR regulation from the European Union gives us new rules for privacy protection, so that's very much an explicit set of rules set in legislation. But there's also all kinds of informal rules. The game that we're playing here is not based on formal rules, it's based on informal rules. And the same applies to, well, for example, the collaboration between the universities of Eindhoven, Tilburg, and the city of Den Bosch and the province of North Brabant. They're playing this game that resulted in this center, and it's very much played by rules that emphasize that there should be economic development here in North Brabant, which requires a collaboration between all these actors. So there's all these formal and informal rules, and then there's a series of games. Sometimes it's about, and we've heard all kinds of games in the previous presentations. A game can be developing a plan for dealing with traffic problems, or a game can be how to make the city carbon neutral by 2030. So there's these games that are being played according to these rules, and these games result in what we would call emergent form of governance. So what comes out of these choices, and that can be a smart city mobility system, a smart system for collecting environmental data, or yesterday we heard the example of citizens collecting data about air quality. Those are all emerging forms of governance. So in that sense, we see that the smart city is the result of all these interactions and not the result of some technological design. Now, if we go one step further and we want to look at what the basic structure is, you would say the very basic structure of the Datapolis is this well-known figure. We're talking about state, civil society, and market. And at its very heart, in every city, it's a combination of these actors that play these games and that result in emergent forms of governance. And to give you but sometimes one of these actors dominates, and I'll give you some examples. This is the operations center in Rio de Janeiro, which is very much about government control, government bringing all the information together in an operations center so that local government in the city of Rio de Janeiro can control everything that's going on. Waze is a mobility app that was originally developed by citizens themselves to exchange information about traffic jams. And the idea would, if everybody would give information about traffic jams, then each driver could find the easiest way through the city. So that's very much, that started as a civil society initiative, but in the end it was bought by Google, so now it's a commercial initiative that helps citizens to move in the city. And the third one is WhatsApp group. These are groups that we have in the Netherlands. In England, there's also some of the group, other parts of the world as well, where citizens exchange information about a crime in their areas. For example, if many people break into their cars, these WhatsApp groups are used so that people can watch out for what's happening and try to prevent these forms of crime. So what we see here that it's that there can be a dominance of the state actors, commercial actors, or market actors, or civil society actors. But at its heart, and that's what we also already saw in the example of Waze, it's a combination. It's the interactions between state, market, and civil society that we need to understand these outcomes. And in the final part of my presentation, I would like to describe five sorts of games that are being played in the smart city. I've organized these games in terms of the functions of information system design. So I'm talking about information collection, information storage, information access, information visualization, and I seem to forget one, and data information usage. So these are five very well-known perspectives, games known from the engineer perspective. But I'm going to show how all these games should be understood as governance games between real actors, and that they all raise challenges in terms of legitimacy. Because in the end, I think we need to strive for outcomes of these games that are seen as legitimate in the sense that the community of citizens sees them as beneficial to their individual and collective interests. Because in the end, that should be the cornerstone, I think, for these smart city developments. So the first one is the data collection challenge. Here the question is what kind of data we're going to collect. And I'm sure you've seen all these fancy presentations about sensor networks collecting all kinds of data about people. The Living Lab Stratum Eind in Eindhoven is a well-known example here in the Netherlands of an effort to collect all kinds of data about citizens. But the key challenge here is actually to organize modes of data collection that are effective for tackling urban problems with respect to privacy of citizens. So there's an important challenge here. And the challenge is not that simple because de-anonymization is becoming increasingly easy. In Amsterdam, the city of Amsterdam started to collaborate with Google to provide information about cars so that Google could help them to use the available parking facilities more efficiently. But some academics could show that even though the information was provided in an anonymous way, it could be de-anonymized. So we need to really be careful to tackle this challenge carefully so that the privacy of citizens is protected. So this is one game and one challenge that is very important to the legitimacy of the smart city. The second one is about data storage. There's a huge discussion now, of course, about Facebook and who the owner is of Facebook data, and to what extent we should be the owners of our own Facebook data. But in terms of the smart city, an interesting example is the data of GPS systems. What happened in the Netherlands is that the company TomTom sold these GPS systems to the police so that they could use these data to have better speed controls. Well, when citizens found out, they were quite angry because they felt that the data about their behavior was being used against them by having better speed controls by the police. This, however, raises also a more basic issue. Whose data are they? If you work with a GPS, do the data belong to the GPS company or do they belong to you? And the same, of course, applies to all kinds of other data that we generate through our telephones and through all these other devices. Whose data are these? So the challenge is here, find forms of storage that facilitate smartness while not impinging on legitimate forms of ownership. So the data ownership is a key issue here. Game number 3, data usage challenge. We see that many governments are very interested in doing these sentiment analysis on social media. So they want to analyze how citizens feel about their governments, how they feel about certain measures, how they feel about certain developments. So these social media are used as sort of a monitor scanning the sentiments of society. But you could very well ask the question to what extent that is legitimate. To what extent that can actually be done, because it also means that information that I, for example, would put on Twitter to give some information to my friends is used by governments to analyze how I and other citizens feel about government. But that was never my intention, it was never my reason for putting the information out there. Similarly, in Straat om Zijnd in Eindhoven, the police also follows all the social media accounts to get information about what people are doing on Straat om Zijnd, but they never release that information to give it to the police or to local government to analyze these sentiments. So the challenge here is facilitate usage of data for tackling their urban problems while guaranteeing that it does not harm citizens or stakeholders, because there's a big risk there, and that's sort of the bigger risk here, that we get a big brother that's analyzing us in all these different ways. Game number 4 is the data visualization challenge. And the interesting one, the other 3 are discussed quite regularly in the media and also in academic publications. There's relatively little attention for the politics of visualization, whereas I think this really requires our attention, because visualizations are never neutral. There's always all kinds of choices, value choices in these visualizations. And we need to understand these visualizations, also Karima's dashboards, as political constructions. There's all kinds of values and political choices in there. So for example, if you look at crime maps, you have to realize that these crime maps are a certain representation of reality out there that's based on a set of political choices, not only rational, not only neutral choices, political choices. So the challenge here is to provide forms of visualization that facilitate debate with insights while not limiting out crucial perspectives. And what we see coming up now is many people are arguing for multidimensional representations. So it should not only be one dominant visualization, we should have many, maybe even competing visualizations that inform us about certain situation. We also see people arguing that we should have more emphasis on storytelling next to the visualizations based on quantitative data. We should have new forms of storytelling so that we can have a rich understanding of the city. And the final one is the data access. It's quite an interesting one because there's a lot of discussion about open data. But if you look at open data, there's quite different perspectives. The open data movement sees open data as a public good. The business community sees it as a valuable commodity, and the state sees it as a means by which political agenda and policy programs can be legitimated. So these are very different perspectives. This here is a picture of Groningen again, so this seems to be a common point in these presentations. There's a lot of discussion about the information about the earthquakes, to what extent it should be public. Another interesting example is data about risky locations. In Holland, we had an explosion of a fireworks factory. After that, people said, we need to have all the information about the risky locations. And then 9/11 happened, and after that, people said, no, we don't want the information about the risky locations out there because it will be used by terrorists. So this is a very, very interesting contrast here, and therefore we need to enable and stimulate access to data, but restricting it in the case of legitimate objections. So this is, again, a set of important choices. So to conclude, the key message is the smart city is much too important to leave it to the techies. We should have a democratic embedding of discussions about smart cities. That is crucial. And that's not only about user choices, it's about representative, deliberative, and participatory democracy. So we need to make a connection between the technological debate and the democratic debate. In the end, I would say a smart city is about future making. It's about the type of city that we want in the future. And future making should not be led up to technological people who think they know the future, but it should be an aspect of democratic discussion to make sure that the future is the kind of future that the polis, the citizens, want. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Just before the bell.
So then to present you, thank you for your presentation. We honor the speed and the English punctuality with one question from the public. So if there is one question, yes, please.
I was wondering, you talk about the polis, so having a communal target as all citizens, and that is a government, market, and a civil society problem. How do you look at, in the Netherlands, there have recently been a couple of court cases to enforce national government, but it could also be done at the city level, where actually the view of a specific group of citizens are enforced by the courts. Shouldn't they be considered a fourth force in this context?
Yeah, that's it's a very good question. Thank you very much. On the one hand, of course, there's legal protection. I didn't talk about that very much. I talked about sets of rules, but there's a legal protection also of minorities. Legal procedures can also be regarded, in my perspective, as a set of games. So these games can be used strategically to influence certain outcomes. Within our set of rules, these are legitimate games. So these are legitimate ways that citizens can use to express their outcomes. The broader overall question is to what extent these outcomes will be seen as legitimate by a broader group of citizens. And I think there was a very interesting example in the city of Utrecht, where there was also one group of citizens that really wanted windmills because they said we want more sustainable cities. And then there was another group that protested against this because they said they make a lot of noise and they pollute our horizons. So there was a lot of struggle between these two minor groups. And what the local government said, they said they wanted to broaden up the discussion, and they used actually a very old, also going back to the Greeks, old mechanism, the lottery, as a way to engage random citizens. So what they want to do is not engage the active participating citizens, but engage the normal citizens, if you want to call it that way. So they used the lottery to bring together a group of 200 citizens, and they had a series of 4 meetings where they were informed by experts, and and on the basis of these meetings, they drafted an energy plan, what in the end also was accepted by the local government board and by the city council. So yes, all these games are legitimate, but it also raises the question, does it overall lead to forms of legitimacy that we need to accept? And that means that all these discussions about technology need to be paralleled by discussions about democratic innovation.